Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I want to ramble on for a little bit about specializations and which builds fit them, as this is a companion piece to the specialization in-depth guide, so if you haven't watched that one yet, well worth a watch, as although this will be also a standalone video by itself. As we're going to go through the build collection, and I'm going to basically discuss why some builds are kind of tied to certain specializations and why a lot of builds actually aren't tied to any specialization, and you can kind of freely pick. I feel discussing it this way as well has some value, as where we basically got taught the theory in the in-depth guide. Here we're going to just put it into practice, and by just seeing different variants and some of the choices that others make, you can maybe start to get a better grasp and choose the right specializations at the right moments. So everything in here will be timestamped, as well as we'll go through the build collection in the order of characters, because that for me makes the more sense instead of like grouping them together. So we'll go through character 1, 2, 3, and 4. I've selected already some of the builds I want to talk about. And yeah, we're just going to go one by one, and I'm just going to give a basic brief ideology behind why a certain specialization got chosen, or why it's basically meaningless to talk about specialization with some of the builds. So yeah, let's hop in. And to start off with, for those that don't know the build collection, I have a build collection. It's linked down below as well, so if you're interested in it, you can go have a look. It is basically all of the builds that I have on my first and second account of value, as it is the first 4 characters of, or the 4 characters of my first account, and just the main character of my second account. Third account isn't on here because also basically just copies of the rest of them. And yeah, it is just build pictures of builds that I have in the game, and yeah, they are, as they are numbered here, 1 point, and then for instance 2 point. The number on this side of the dot, on the left side of the dot, is the character number, and then on the right it goes from 0.1 to 16, and that should give away that yeah, it is the loadout slots in the game as they are. As for instance here, in here I have as the build we'll be discussing 1.02. If we go to 1.02, in here we have a striker. And yeah, let's start off discussing that one right away as well. As yeah, this is a chest striker with Elmo. This is more just to represent all of the AR variants of striker. Because of course you can go obliterate chest, or you can go striker chest. For instance, here it's with the striker chest. And as you can see there, as well as my specialization, I have firewall. This one, for instance, doesn't really matter which specialization you really take with it. That's also why the overlaid on it is Gunner, Survivalist, Demolitionist, and Sharpshooter. I would say those 4 are actually the preferred ones for this. Firewall, actually not so much. As you also can see from in-game, I, for instance, have Gunner equipped as my specialization there. As with most red builds, most pure red builds that aren't really caring about certain skills or such, there is really no preference there. If they are mid-range or long-range, firewall kind of tapers off in effectiveness. If they are close range, then firewall is a lot more effective, as we'll see, for instance, with an Oreo striker much later. And yeah, they don't really care. Even here, I've left out technician, but technician would also be a choice just for its skill tier. Now, of course, Gunner, for instance, gives us much higher personal output with its rate of fire on kill and such, and especially solo, where you're getting all of the kills. That works really well. Survivalist here would even still be a good option for its flame grenades, for the ability to break armor plates quite easily. Even the bonus to allies, if you, for instance, shoot weak points quite a bit, if you are one of my peoples, basically, and do shoot them a lot, you do actually apply a lot of status effects on the enemy. Whether Gunner, the group buff of 5 detox is pretty powerful. Survivalist has, to me, basically an equally powerful one. together with you having the ability to just make strong enemies, just even as a red build, you toss a fire grenade at them, they're going to be on fire, outside of a few, of course. And that gives you your team a pretty big team buff. But also what I would say here is actually that Survivalist and Demo especially have really good team buffs. Gunner has a really good personal buff. So if you're solo, Gunner works really well. In groups, I gravitate towards Demolitionist especially. Survivalist is also pretty good. Sharpshooter is even good as well. While the group buff is pretty bad, the stability buff that it has is pretty good. And yeah, that's kind of holds true for most of the red builds. That's why also, while we'll be just taking this as a general red build, it doesn't really care what its specialization is. Because even here, Technician would work. If you're especially using a shield, you get one more tier on it. You could take one blue and Technician, have that. You can then also go with a flatline weapon, which gives a pretty good buff by itself, being one of the stronger talents available. So you have a bunch of options with red builds. They really don't care what specialization they are. That's also why generally I don't really talk about specializations when we're talking about red builds. Now let's move on to a build that really does care about its specialization. This is an explosive build. This is the sacrifice variant. There's also an Empress variant. Both of them really care that they have Demo. Demo works really well with them. None of the other specializations really have the bonuses that you would have for this one. So even Technician, that extra skill tier, really isn't worth it in here over the other benefits of Demolitionist. And in this case, it's not even just the extra explosive damage, it is also the mortar. The mortar is really the best skill for explosive builds. You can pair it with other things, as we have here, with Seekers, with Stickies, with Shrapnel Traps or Stinger Hive. But the mortar is really, it's the big boy. It's the thing that makes this build work. And because of that, we need Demo, as that is, of course, the skill from Demolitionist. This here, then, for instance, becomes a build that really is tied to a single specialization. Let's move on to 1.06, which is a third drone, somewhat hybridy, although pretty core. It is just an third drone hybrid, glass combined arms variant with a bunch of crit chance, crit damage in here. This is also what I would recommend for a skill build, for third drone specific skill build. If you're only using the third end drone, you really don't need skill haste. This build, even without any of the skill haste that people like just slather on here, because generally people just go skill damage, skill haste, and then skill haste mods on top. Taking this turret to 9 point something seconds. Instead, we have 17 seconds. Well, that is a doubling. That is not going to make the difference. I feel you're much better off getting a high amount of crit chance and crit damage. Capacitor also helps with that, having 10 crit chance, 30 crit damage. It bumps it up quite a bit. You can make an effective fighting build with this. Here, glass, of course, could be, for instance, replaced with the kinetic momentum. Here, the glass is here because it also applies to the weapon. But then, Technician really makes it the best choice for this. We can get a skill tier from it. This will be a repeating thing, especially with a lot of skill builds that aren't status effect based, but are just damage based out of a turret and drone. That Technician's ability to have a +1 skill tier lets us have one more red core, for instance, here. What you could do as well, of course, is you have blue versions of this. You would go a blue core and try to armor regen, and generally with a memento. Both of those just benefit a lot from Technician. And then Technician, you can, of course, spec it into having a little bit more skill damage. Generally, none of the other specializations for most of the third drones and third drone hybrids, it just won't work out. So for this, again, it is kind of tied into Technician. Also, for instance, for its Faraday field effect, letting you have, if you're fighting Black Dust and they have Warhounds, you would lose, especially just the drone. You're still going to lose that one, but at least the turret stays up when jammers are active and they just Faraday themselves. They can Faraday you as well alongside of them. And yeah, that makes quite a difference. If we now move on to 1.07, in this case, the Negotiator TurDro Hybrid. And yeah, with the hybrids, there is definitely no discussion about Technician. Generally, all of the hybrids that are based around turret and drone, and even actually, I would say, for instance, as we'll see at the end, TechTanks, they're in the name, it's already, tech is in there, that's the Technician specialization. But any of the TurDro hybrids just benefit way too much from Technician to pick really anything else. You get to have one more red core. Now, for instance, here, I'm even using that extra red core for a memento, for instance, here. Although you can also, or a coyote here, although, of course, you can also go a memento and have and then not per se need Technician, but still then Technician is the best choice. Generally as well, the capacitor lets you recoup. If you're going capacitor already, you kind of need a build that has over three yellow cores generally to make the capacitor the most effective choice. Because I see the capacitor kind of pop up in builds that have 1 or 2 yellow cores. To me, that doesn't make sense at all. And you have to really effectively be using those yellow cores. So yeah, here we see that, of course, with the TurDro Hybrid, it has 6 together with Technician. And yeah, then Technician is kind of locked in. You don't really get to pick anything else here. And that's the case for me personally for all of the TurDro hybrids. So the Striker variant, the Ongoing Directive variant, and even the HeadHunter variant. I'm going to be sticking with having Technician on them. Then we go to one specialized, basically red build. This is a glass red, one of my last remaining glass reds in the build collection. And this one I've tied up specifically with being LMGs. Now, both of the LMGs types are in here because there are 2 types. There is the pouch ones, which is basically the MG5s, the M60s, the M249s, Negev, Stoner, GR9. Then we also have the mag ones, which is the LAD6 and the RPK. The mag ones, of course, don't really need this pouch from Gunner. The LMG ones really can benefit from it. And especially here, the MG5, the non-infantry MG5, fits in pretty well with Gunner in this layout, or with red glass in this layout, with contractors and Fox's Prayer, because actually it lands on 54 crit chance, because it has that 1 crit chance less, but it actually has, especially now with the plus 20% to its base, it actually has pretty good compensation for that loss of a mod slot. So because of that, and me needing a pouch for it in this case, yeah, Gunner kind of locks it in. That pouch from Gunner is the reason to pick it here. Now, of course, if I went with the RPK, then that isn't the case. But neither the RPK nor the LAD6 has a variant which has only 3 mods and enough compensation in its base weapon damage. So this is actually working out pretty well. Both of these are set to rate of fire as a third stat, and the MG5 in this case is landing on 54. So if I'm at mid-range, I can use this one. If I'm at short range and have the only the crit damage bonus, then I'm much better off with this RPK, which is at 59 because there's 1/5 crit chance more. So this kind of setup is actually pretty good outside of strikers, where we kind of live with ACS in that second slot. But when you go with other red builds, you don't need to. And then, yeah, for instance, here, Gunner is actually with this red build, this specific red build is kind of a lock-in for that. Even in group setups, I would take that. Let's move on to 1.10. This is a HeadHunter setup. Now, with HeadHunters, especially with this one, the Hunter's Fury, I'm going to be a pretty close range. Firewall can be a really good pick, especially for its shield. Now, of course, that Striker shield is just a separate multiplier to your damage output, especially if you have multiple enemies spawning in front of you, which with this build isn't uncommon because this is really a farming build, and especially, for instance, with territory controls, or with propagandas, or with hostage rescues, or public executions. With some places you can spawn camp them, of course, and then this shield, it is per enemy. So if you have 4 enemies in front of you, you could have as much as 44% extra damage on that shot. That makes Firewall a really good pick, but that's really not the only pick here. So one of the other layouts that you can go with this is having Douglas and Harding chest with HeadHunter, and then instead of the Douglas and Harding being here, you put a Memento here. In that setup, you're going for a much stronger shield. What you can do then as well you can still then go with the Striker shield. You can have then the 2-core Striker shield. You could also go to Technician and then grab a 3-tier Bulwark shield. Because you're mostly using the Regulus. The shotguns are there and you can definitely use them, but the Regulus is the main tool of this build. And yeah, that can really make a difference with a 3-tier shield. Those two really fit in really well here. For instance, here, this being a HeadHunter build, Sharpshooter, I wouldn't really pick it, although Sharpshooter would give you, for instance, here, even an option of having the weapon of it, the specialization weapon, the TAC 50. That is you have these two are really short range. Even the Regulus isn't that effective at beyond mid range. Beyond 20-25 meters, it starts losing effectiveness, and also, of course, your gear is set up to be under 15 meters. But sometimes you just need to reach out and touch someone, and a TAC 50 can do that. So yeah, in this one, for instance, it becomes Firewall, especially Technician as a secondary choice with some options, especially going Memento and then the Bulwark, and then yeah, Sharpshooter if you just want the weapon. Then you can also have, for instance, the Recon Drone from that, which can be really handy, especially with a build like this that is really aggressive, knowing where everything is, where everyone is, and if you're, for instance, out in the streets, which, you know, for a farming build like this one, if you're getting basically a patrol walking in on you, you can really easily see that with the Recon Drone. But I wouldn't say per se that this is for this one. We'll see a high-end variant where that fits in much better. Let's go to the last one from Character 1. And this is an PFE build. This one's set up for Regen and then group buffs. This is one that I like running for countdowns especially. And as a setup for PFE, Survivalist. Survivalist, of course, really fits in well, but we'll see also later on a different choice in Firewall. But for Firewall, for me personally, you really need to have multiple 13s in there, which isn't the case here, of course. Here I have them actually all with 12s. This build is set up with all 12s. And that lands us at, in this case, it would land us on 72. We have 6 12s. If you have all 13s, you can land on 78, and then you really don't need Survivalists at that point because it caps at 80, of course. But in this case, taking 72 to 80 to the cap is beneficial. That extra 8%, I'm not going to really have any other options that really compete well with it. We could, of course, have, for instance, Technician to have maybe one less blue, but also I'm using my blues for my talents, so it's not a big loss. And even here, I am applying status effects to enemies, and even, yeah, the poison, the disorient, the shock, all of them will help bonus our allies with Survivalist. So yeah, let's move on to Character 2. And here we are with character number 2. And yeah, we're going to start off with their first build here, which is 2.01 on the build collection. As that is this Hotshot, as I have it there. And yeah, Hotshot being a shooting, a sniping build, really benefits from Sharpshooter. So here's one place where Sharpshooter really fits in well. It has the bonuses, of course, for stability. It has its bonuses for headshot for these. But also, even when you are in cover, this is actually really the reason that Hotshot keeps its ammo up so much. You're both getting reloads from the void, as long as you're especially keeping it going with Determined and stuff. But also, in the meantime, while you are in cover, you're also building up ammo just from the specialization. Then as well, one of the best tools for Hotshot is this Recon Drone. You really want to have the Revive out, of course, just you get to have one extra mistake, basically. But yeah, the Recon Drone is super powerful for a build like this. And that makes yeah, sharpshooter really the pick for any sniping build. So I have this really on aces, on this, on generally most of the red style of these. But then of course, if the TurDro hybrids that I have with both hotshot and high ends, as was the latest builds showcase, those then being TurDro hybrids, technician then kind of wins out. But here for sharpshooters, for sniping builds, yeah, this is an invaluable tool. And also just the weapon itself, just having this to one-tap enemies to start off with, for instance, can be really strong, of course. Especially if you're not running determined, when we don't care what is getting the first headshot, because here with determined, you would want it to be the weapon with determined, but especially if you're not running that, you don't really care which weapon is really hitting that. And the TAC 50 can hit much harder than generally all the other weapons, except on names, of course. Let's move on to 2.03, and on 2.03 we see another specialized red build. This is a rifle especially based setup, and here I'm running it for especially rifles. Flatline works really well. Spotter also really works really well, because of course obliterate and glass are well, obliterate, you can't really stack it. Glass is a really good pick, but of course glass has its downsides. For rifles, this works out pretty well as well. And also for rifles, this is a really good talent, being flatline being a really good talent. And technician is generally the really only acceptable way that you can keep this going. You can, of course, have the recon drone, but the recon drone doesn't always pulse. You can pulse yourself, but that doesn't have perfect uptime. Or you need to, for instance, run a Night Watcher, and yeah, Coyote pretty strong. And yeah, of course, yeah, as we have there, the sacrifice is an option, but this also kind of works out well for losing a little bit of crit chance with weapons that, for instance, here, I really like the Mark 17, but the Mark 17 comes with 3 mods. Generally, that would land on 59. Here, by losing one of the mods for the Link Laser Pointer, we're dropping to 54. And I'm going to be using this mostly at the mid-range and long range of the Coyote. Not so much at the short range, unless I'm getting rushed by something. Like, I'm going to be keeping a little bit more distance. And yeah, spotter is generally worth it for rifle builds over obliterate. Nowadays, although I would say for, especially if you're running ARs, do consider just putting obliterate here. Obliterate is now, especially with its 10-second duration, it doesn't fall away as often. It is actually, to me, a little bit too big of a buff to it. But yeah, the spotter still has a place, but mostly just for rifles. Let's move on to 2.04. This is an FI build, just general use FI build. You may see here that demo is equipped, and also, yeah, demo and survivalist, I have these as options, and even technician here as an option. All three are really options for this. Survivalist is a general pick. Survivalist, of course, has a bunch of buffs to healing, outgoing healing. You can even use the Roly if you want to, the Roly healer. Not the greatest tool, but it is actually, you can just drop it and it just goes around and heals people. Especially with the amount of healing that you have here, it actually heals pretty well. And we have, of course, also in these, we generally run the setup. With the setup being a blue core, that already, for instance, just having technician as an option there, just for that is an option. Because then you don't need the best variant of it. Although they are craftable now, you can get the blueprints from control points, and you will, if you have all the blueprints, you will have that one. You can go, but still, it might be handy just as an easy fix, because you then only need either the skill haste or repair skills on it. You can put the other stat on there. You can keep the blue core and go technician. And technician isn't the worst either. You can also spec towards having the repair on there. Also, what you can do that for as well is to have your hive be Faraday. So this is actually one of the strategies for instance, in incursion, you either have the healer be demo or technician. For technician, it's for the Faraday effect, so you don't get shocked at all. And yeah, there is, of course, one of the main bosses at the end, that skinny little beep that shocks everybody. You can just prevent that by being technician. Demo is the other pick, and demo is the reason for demo is the 5 detox. You applying 5 detox to all of your allies for all of the red builds. So none of them needs to run demo, and then just the healer runs it. And then also the healer is protected from one of the explosions, meaning generally it's getting hit by one of the splashes of the mortars at the end, which can be very deadly. Keeping the healer alive, meaning if the healer dies, the team wipes. If you lose a red, you can still sometimes, if you lose a red build, you can still recover it sometimes. And then, yeah, survivalist. And then what this makes it is that, yeah, you either go technician or demo, especially for the incursions. You can also go demo, for instance, in 4-man groups, just because you don't need that extra healing per se in 4-man groups. But then in raids, where you basically have one job. You have one job and you might as well do it the best you can. Survivalist then becomes the choice because you're better off healing way too much and making sure that, you know, nobody can blame you for the wipes. And then, yeah, survivalist becomes the pick there. Let's move on to 2.07, the aptly named Oxi Moron in the build collection. And Oxi build. Here you can, really the best pick is Technician. Well, you could go for some other ones, especially if you're trying to provide group buffs. Technician just having that damage bonus and also providing you the access to the Technician Hive, the Artificer. The Artificer buffs your chem whenever you pull it out. You don't even need to deploy this in the same way that, for instance, TechTanks use it for the shields. Just having this, pulling the Oxi out will just have a buff go towards it. And here we're really putting all of our damage into just one skill. Well, we do have a lot of skill damage and some other options, and especially going the Costa route, you just have Empress, and then you are really focusing on the Oxi, so you don't really need another damaging skill. The Oxi is doing most of the work. And as well, we're using here Fox's Prayer. So Contractors applies to most of the skills outside of the ballistic ones, so not the turrets, so not the sniper turret, the assault turret, or the striker drone. Outside of that, this the Contractors applies to all, and the Fox's Prayer applies to Oxi, and also often forgotten the Demolisher Firefly, but that one is that one isn't that important. But here, this build is then, because of these two pieces, is very much set up for that. Technician also allows us to have a little bit of an easier time to have one more yellow core. Although here, actually, I'm record the core still, but so I do have the option if I wanted to recore it back to yellow, but this allows you to just have a Contractors with a red core or a Fox's Prayer with just a red core, making for much easier farming. And yeah, Technician's bonuses work really well. Also, you can Faraday yourself with the Hive or others as well, which sometimes is a thing to care about, because yeah, you can just plop this on the ground, prevent yourself from being disrupted and not being able to use your other skills. Let's move on to 2.10, which is the Combat Medic, the Striker Combat Medic, though here it's being kind of the same as with the TurDro Hybrids. Technician is really the only pick. Technicians allows you to have one more red core, making also for easier pieces. So for instance, here I'm using a Cheska chest here with Overwatch, so this one's dedicated to it, but I can also just use my Obliterate chest from just Striker, from some of the other builds, and just having that ability makes it so much easier. That doesn't help you with having the other pieces needing to be damage numbers, so you can record them, of course, but yeah, it saves you at least one core. And here as well, again, Capacitor really fits in well. With Technician, we're also not even losing that much. And this build, just because of that extra tier, and because also we are going for damage, and the Capacitor really works very well for that, Technician really becomes the only pick here, because any other pick, we would need to lose a red core here. We're recouping anyway 7.5 from the 15. Basically, we're having, whenever we go yellow core with the Capacitor, we're just basically, instead of losing the full red core, we're going 7.5. So we're keeping quite a bit. And yeah, with, again, most of these hybrids, Technician just makes the most sense, especially for that extra skill tier. And then again as well, on top of that, we have the Faraday, we have all of the other benefits. And yeah, if you spec it into healing as well, you can get a little bit of extra healing out of it. Let's go to the last one on this character, which is, as we looked earlier at an high-end base PFE, and where we discussed that, yeah, we picked Survivalist for the extra PFE, but we could go some other choices if you had 13s in there. Here, with all of the gear sets based PFEs, what happens is that you have one piece less because you need the 4-piece. You then lose one of the slots where you would put the improvised piece for that mod slot. So you do lose one slot worth of PFE, meaning that this lands on 60. This is 5 times 12 in this case with 12s in it. 60 is to me too low for PFE to be worth it. To me, PFE really starts to become worth it at generally 70, I would say. 66, 2/3 of the way there. Because you're getting a reduction on basically every incoming hit, it actually is really noticeable if you're dropping down in PFE. So in this case, I'm definitely going Survivalist because we're taking that 60, we're taking that to 70. And Survivalist having that PFE bonus really works out well there. It's really only for that because it's not helping with many of the other in other ways. We will still get, flame grenades, which can CC for us. We can provide the group buff, but here it's definitely the pick because of that PFE. Let's move on to character number 3, where we'll discuss a few more builds. As we are indeed now on character number 3. And yeah, the same basis applies here. We're going to start off with 3.02 there as selected there. 3.02 is Strikers, but now with Oreo. Completely different, completely the same, but completely different. And really what this adds in is that we have the ability to go Firewall here as well. Now, Firewall will fit in really well with Oreo because, well, that shield is really going to be in range, the Striker shield. And on top of that, we also are applying a group buff to our allies. Firewall with Oreo actually in this layout with the Cheska on top of it, as we aren't really expecting anything else except the short range buff in the incursions. That means that generally we would run one Coyote, 2 people would be running Firewall to have overlapping Firewall buffs. On top of that, then the others can do any of the combinations of either Grupo or Cheska, or having Contractors with Cheska, but then you need one more mod, or actually, yeah, Bloody Knuckles as being one of the top picks. Generally, one person is running this build, and then 2 other people are running the Bloody Knuckles variant of this. And yeah, 2 people are running Firewall just to have the overlapping Firewall buff. That is really strong for incursion. And yeah, here the others, while they still have effective bonuses, Firewall just lines up so well. The second you go really close range, shotguns, SMGs, all of those kind of builds, as we'll see repeating here over and over again actually with this character, as we'll move on to 3.05, although actually in between. And this is Eclipse. Eclipse, as often gets brought up, I generally run my Eclipses with Survivalist, and I often get asked why Survivalist. Survivalist is for the group buffs. Here, of course, I'm basically giving a constant 10% to all my allies. If I'm doing it right, that 10% is basically always up. They're either bleeding or on fire. And generally as well, I don't run Eclipse solo. Well, I can understand running it solo, especially if you're running challenging 5 directives. I generally run heroic 5 directives, not being that much into farming, more being into the challenge of it. I don't run Eclipse solo, but if you are running Eclipse solo, then yeah, Firewall makes a lot of sense because you don't need those group buffs of this, while the crossbow is still nice for having it for breaking armor plates. If you're fighting the right factions, you don't see much armor plates, basically, not fighting Black Tusk. The flame grenades are nice, but yeah, you can do the same with the chem if you're doing it right, especially if you're just farming on challenging and you're doing territory controls and stuff and you know where they're spawning. Then yeah, Firewall's plus 20% burn duration is pretty strong, and you're mostly then picking it for that. In this case, for group play, a Survivalist is to me the big pick. I generally always have this on. Also, in 4-man, the armor plates are actually scaled up a little bit, so they don't instantly die. So you can actually use a crossbow to break those off. You have the bonuses. Also, flame grenades as a way of applying sledge quite consistently is really strong. The other pick that we sometimes see popping up here or even here instead of the electric is to go China Light. I would never recommend that. While the vial does scale with the tick, and we'll actually even see a build where I do have Demolitionist there as an option to scale the vial ticks up. While it does scale with explosive damage, which we could get either from Demolitionist or China Light here on the glove, what I feel a lot of people, and we'll go into game for that for a second, have missed is if you actually read the thing, it says total damage dealt is equal to 50% of your concussion grenade damage. And usually people just stop there. This used to also be the old text for it because it did get changed. And increased by your status effect attributes. It goes up by your status effect as well. Not as much as China Light would do in this case, but also China Light is barely ahead. You're gaining a little bit on your vial ticks. You're losing a lot on your fire. Your fire and your bleed are really important tools to me on a build like that. Demo does not belong here. While Demo then does apply 5 detox to your allies and can be a pretty big bonus, especially nowadays with strikers and such. They aren't running Fox's Prayer, for instance, so it's not as heavily diminished as back in the day when most people were running it both on their weapon and on their Fox's Prayer. Now it's just usually on the weapon, so that 5% becomes 4 point something percent. It's still not really worth it because this is giving 10%. It is a separate multiplier to everything else, being a full 10%. Yeah, Demo, this is mostly just for me to rant that don't put Demo here. Just don't. Let's move on to 3.10, where we have Redify, one of the buffing builds. Redify is really cool, and yeah, Redify being somewhat of a hybrid, that extra skill tier can be really nice here. Firstly, as well, I run this a lot in Countdown. You have a disruption happening there. We can use the Faraday with the Hive, and I generally consistently can make this work on Extraction. We huddle up most of the team basically around the Hive, giving everybody Faraday, and then we have one person kind of pushing in to trigger the spawn of the hunters, which then disrupts generally everybody. But instead of that, this just doesn't. And of course, I can just use it as well to make sure I don't get, at the very least, even if I'm not in a coordinated team, I can make sure I don't get disrupted, so I can still heal people. And here also, yeah, that extra skill tier adds to my skills quite a bit, making them not completely effective because, yeah, this is very much a red build that just has some healing skills on it. But yeah, you can still eke out a little bit more. And here, it being 2 skill tiers, Capacitor isn't actually the pick here still. The Elmo does outcompete it. The burst of the Capacitor is actually higher at this point with 2 skill tiers, but its sustain is so much lower. On top of that, you also don't have the weapon handling of an Elmo. So yeah, so the Capacitor here is still not a pick. That really starts at 3 skill tiers, I feel. Let's move on to the next one on this character, which is Hunter's Fury. We discussed it already a little bit. Short range builds, especially here being with the Oreo or with the Banshee. We're going to be under 15 meters for the buff of Hunter's Fury. We want Firewall, basically, at that point. The shield is one of the biggest damage bonuses here. This is also my reason that, for instance, on a shotgun build, I don't think, as a lot of people, for instance, the new skill coming in, or the new talent coming in, it isn't that big of a buff, and people go, why not just go instead of Firewall, go Technician and go Flatline here. The shield is the reason. This shield is very powerful. That 10%, you can consistently make it happen. You could go, I prefer having 2 blues in there for the shield. You can go full red as well and just burn out damage. Firewall overlaps so very well with this because also, for instance, it has the mechanic of whenever you armor break, it sets enemies within 5 meters on fire, that can save your life quite often, on top of having the disorient from here. Also, actually, the reduction, of course, having been made to the healing, 100% healing that Hunter's Fury used to have. You still have 80% with Firewall and Hunter's Fury together, so that helps out quite a bit. Actually, you do notice it, because if you're especially hitting health kit, you're just pulling yourself quite a bit up, because that is still 80% of like 300-ish K, 363K as I'm cheating and looking into the game. And yeah, that is a decent amount. And yeah, Firewalls, especially for that shield. Here, I wouldn't generally pick anything else except maybe Gunner. Gunner is the only one that could compete here. This is a build that gets run solo quite a bit. You could even have one-piece Palisade in here, so having both the buff or the armor on kill from Hunter's Fury, then having Palisade and having Gunner on top of each other is actually pretty nice. And then what you would use as your skill, you can still use a shield, but actually the Banshee Pulse is also a really good tool, especially short range, because you don't have to charge it up as much to just get yourself safe. Let's go move on to the last one from this character, which is 3.14. And here we see, as we discussed with the other PFE builds, if you go 13s, and yeah, on this one, you know, I'll do a humble brag here of yeah, these are all 13s, and this is also all 13s in game. This is the build I'm using my all 13s on. This is very much set up for a lot of extra damage. It is crit damage plus headshot. Not the best choice. Generally, we don't want to stack those, because even here I'm stacking 5 headshot stats. When I'm headshotting, I'm doing about 20% more damage. And so yeah, we have 50% worth of headshot doing 20% more on headshots. And that's of course on headshots. But then this build can kind of push up close. I want to push up close as well, having Adrenaline Rush Intimidate. And then, yeah, of course, as well, the Firewall Shield lines up really well with that. And especially, of course, in a group setting as well. I'm giving, if I'm in that 10 meters range, which I really want to be as well for the Oreo to make that effective, then yeah, the Firewall buff 10% to all my allies, to enemies within 10 meters of me, that is active. All of those synergize really well with a build like this. But again, I really feel comfortable, only really feel comfortable doing this once you have a bunch of 13s, because yeah, all of these 13s together are 78. That is against the 72 you would have with 12s. Already having a few, maybe already at 75%, I would be comfortable going to Firewall. You would need 13% for that. But yeah, at 78, I wouldn't actually gain much from Survivalist. Of course, I would only gain 2% at that point. That's no longer worth it. So yeah, this is the point where, for instance, and yeah, together with the Oreo being very short range, all my talents also being set up for short range, and then the Striker Shield coming in as extra bonus damage on top of everything. Yeah, this makes the point where Firewall over Survivalist becomes the pick for me. Let's go on to character number 4 for the last few builds we'll be discussing today. And here we've arrived at character number 4. We'll start by discussing 4.01, which is Negotiator, here shown as being with focus and a Cheska backpack, so not with the extra. And it's very much the old style for going for legendaries, just as a oddity, just to show it as well. Here, actually, the way I save some of these builds, as some of times people go like, wait, that's saved with 5 pieces. Also, yeah, it's not with the focus chest. I can grab the focus chest when I want it. I have it set up as a general obliterate here. Why do I have 5 pieces? I have 5 pieces because I can load the build, and then I can go, I want a Coyote Mask. Or I can go, I want a Memento backpack, or I want to have a Vigilance backpack plugged into here. And that way, or even having contractors, if I want to main the LMG, it gives me the options, all of those options, because of course, yeah, she, for instance, also has a contractors that comes from just other builds on her loadouts. So yeah, that's why sometimes some of my loadouts are saved like this. They never get run like that. Although I say never, I sometimes forget, but yeah, just to show that oddity and talk about that, because yeah, that's kind of also what I would recommend doing, as there's also even a video on my channel that you can go look at on how to save loadouts, as yeah, sometimes it is handy to have 5 pieces there, and then you just plop in whatever you want to have as your extra piece. But yeah, let's go back to Negotiator. Negotiator being a red build, we basically have the same thing as Strikers. It can be whatever you want it to be. It depends kind of course, on your weapon as well. Firewall, I would really only say is effective with shorter range weapons or shorter range engagements. Sometimes you have that if you're, for instance, running Lincoln or something. You can make it very short range. This being somewhat set up in the old style for doing legendaries with some shield peeking and stuff. Yeah, I would pick some of the others. Here even as well, Technician could be a choice for that extra skill tier. For the shield, you can even then on top of that run having Future Perfect, which is one of the tactics that was used a lot for legendaries. Extra power to your shield basically at that point. Making Technician even a pick here. Sharpshooter even is a pick here too as a replacement for the 8x scope. I like that scope much better, even though it zooms in a little bit more, of course, but sacrifice for a much better sight picture and a little bit more headshot damage as well. So this being a full-blooded red build, it can really go any of the 6. I would especially, yeah, go Gunner, Survivalist, Demo, or Sharpshooter. For their benefits here. There isn't really anything tying this down, and that's the case for most red builds. Let's move on to 4.05 and Eclipse. In here, we have the Foam Eclipse. With going Foam Eclipse, we're now really going into status effects. We're not dealing that much damage. Firewall would make no sense here. We don't even have a Vial. Demo would make no sense here. Yeah, Survivalist all the way. Both for having a really handy way of sledging with the fire grenades, and of course on top of that the bonus damage you give to your allies. Then you also have the crossbow to deal with the heavies and with warhounds, as you can blow off their armor plates. Even on legendary that works. Outside of the bosses, you can basically one crossbow to any piece of armor. Plates will pop it off. So if you hit a heavy in the chest, which is usually the much more important, the difficult part of this, just hitting them actually in the chest and not hitting their arms and stuff as they're waving them around. Yeah, it will pop it off. All of those together makes for things like this. Here it is basically non-negotiable. At this point it is, because this is also not killing for itself. This is very much a group build. Survivalist now becomes the top pick. Even Technician, which you could take maybe here to have a blue core Courier or something, just doesn't compete well. Well, you do get the EMP grenades, which can be very nice, as they also will give you that status effect. So you can then, instead of taking the EMP sticky or having a jammer pulse there, you can do it with EMP grenades. It just, that extra bonus damage to your team, because you will be running this in a team, having all of them basically do 10% more. Is invaluable here. You wouldn't get the same with Technician. You could also then, for instance, have Faraday in some ways, but there are no good skills that you have to Faraday with. You could go Stinger Hive or something, or maybe even Healing Hive. Then I could maybe more see it, but yeah, Survivalist is just too good really here. Let's move on to 4.09, which is a high-end sharpshooter. Now, we are not locking ourselves, like with the Hunter's Fury, into short range. We're not locking ourselves into mid and long range as we do basically with Hot Shot. This one actually, while I have Survivalist here equipped, a Firewall could also be a pick here again for that shield, because we are using a Regulus pretty consistently. The Sharpshooter is really nice. What I actually like running is having a Bulwark Shield, and then together with a Recon Drone, just giving up the Revive Hive. I can live without it. That's maybe an oxymoron, living without your Revive Hive. I mean, I usually die without it because it wasn't there to revive me. And yeah, maining multiple weapons, Sharpshooter can be really nice just for the stability of it. You can also go Technician for that extra tier to your shield here again. So yeah, for instance, for this one, Sharpshooter, Technician, Firewall, all three make sense, and in different situations I would make different choices here. Let's move on to a weirder one, and here just for talking about demo as well, for instance, for the Val. This is the one place that I would say, for instance, with the Val, you can go demo, because we're not just using it in the, where I really titrated against it in Eclipse, where it isn't fitting into any of the other things of the build. Here we can actually use demo for its mitigation, for its explosion, having the grenade launcher as a pretty powerful tool to deal with waves pretty quickly. It is still, to me, the lesser choice. I would definitely pick Survivalist or Gunner here first. We're applying a lot of status effects. If we're running this in a group setting, Survivalist makes a lot of sense. Also, flame grenades are really handy for getting the ongoing going. Gunner as well, though, actually with a Banshee Pulse, because yeah, Banshee Pulse is really the easiest way to really get this consistently going and keeping it going. Demo doesn't really have those tools, but yeah, it does take a little bit more on the Val for yourself. So the Demolitionist, we're going from 89, which is ticking twice a second, to 98, ticking twice a second. So we're doing 10k more damage per second. It's still not really worth it for the Val ticks. The reason this is in here is because Demolitionist does have good buffs for the group. It has good buffs for yourself. Having a glass as well. Glass and demo actually work really well together. One of the more dangerous things to a glass build is actually explosions. Being able to mitigate one per minute, one per second would be a little bit overkill. One per minute is actually a really good thing. One airburst isn't taking you to your health gauge. You're just not even caring about it. So yeah, that for that more than for the Valtics, because yeah, as we see here, this is the difference in Valtics, going from for instance, Survivalist or Gunner to Demolitionist. It's meaningless on a build that is doing millions of DPS per second. Adding in 10k or well 20k as it's ticking twice. Yeah, those are the level of numbers that we're talking about. Let's go on to the last one we'll be discussing here. And yeah, of course, my beloved tech tanks have to show up at some point, right? And as the name implies, tech tank, technician tank. And the tech part of it is especially for the Artificer. The Artificer is core to this. It applies healing to the shield, even equipped, just not deployed, of course, as we've discussed often here about tech tanks. And technician, of course, as well, giving one extra skill tier, so I don't need to take 5 blues basically to have a 6-tier shield with 4 blues and then 1 yellow from the memento. And then technician, we have 6 skill tiers there. We have 2 skill tiers on the Artificer. That helps a lot with the Artificer as well, taking it from like 33%, I think, with a fully charged memento to 43% with 2 skill tiers. That is quite a noticeable difference. And yeah, this is what makes actually tech tanks possible, because yeah, it is basically an active tank. This Artificer, being the skill that you get from technician, is core to it. So with all of the tech tanks, technician is basically non-negotiable here. Going anything else, because you could go Gunner. I often see somewhat similar builds to this, but then they have 1 more blue core, or they are keeping it at this and then going Gunner or stuff like that. I don't see that as being worth it at all. And especially, of course, here with the Heartbreaker tech tank, which is running Kingbreaker with it, it's invaluable for having Flatline here as well. Yeah, so that all together makes it that this technician, yeah, them being called tech tanks should get in the way. That, yeah, it is invaluable to it. So yeah, we've discussed a ton of builds. We've gone through a lot of it. I've rambled about a lot of stuff. Let's go take this to a conclusion. And to conclude this long rambly video, I hope you found parts of it at least interesting, as I went into a lot more than just the specializations in the end, I found. But yeah, show me a few good builds and I can ramble about them for forever. Yeah, as we discussed on a lot of builds, a lot of red builds, for instance, are really agnostic to what specialization they run. Situationally, you can run quite a bit. Together with that, as well as we didn't really go into it in here as we were discussing singular builds, but also group composition matters. If you can have a demo and a survivalist instead of having 2 demos, for instance, in the group, that can already help a lot, because yeah, the group buffs, of course, are kind of overlapping with other people. Although, of course, sometimes we do choose to go, for instance, yeah, double firewall in incursion settings so that they overlap with each other and give, like, the one is giving the buff to the other and the other is giving the buff back to the other person. There are, yeah, reasons to go overlapping sometimes and other times not. It is very context sensitive. And then, yeah, some builds are very much built around a certain skill that you need the specialization for. Some of the certain specializations fit really well with certain build styles, like TurDro hybrids, like TechTanks, like combat medics, for instance, as well. All of those fit really well with the extra skill tier. They're builds that benefit a lot from it, and some of them are running, for instance, capacitor as well on top of that, meaning that they benefit quite a bit from having technician. And they don't lose out as much damage in comparison to other picks that you could go with as well. And yeah, so we've ended up talking about specializations a lot now with both the in-depth guide and yeah, if you haven't seen that one yet, I would recommend that as well. So it's much more the theory here. We were just discussing more the practice of it. In the future, I'm going to go back and do another for no particular reason, as a lot of things have been popping up lately, especially about in-game texts, which I want to discuss. And for that as well, on the Discord, I'll be actually making a post. For those that know which texts are wrong in the game for talents and sometimes the in-game tooltips and stuff, if you're willing to help out, I'll put in a bunch of the ones that I remember, but likely I'll be missing a few. And if you could add on to that, I would much appreciate it. And also, if you enjoyed this video, if you're willing and can do all of the algorithm things down below, that would be much appreciated, as always, of course. And also, as always, have a good night.